"Sir, drop the weapon! Drop it now!" That's the last clear command heard before a single gunshot echoes across a quiet gas station parking lot. Moments later, a decorated army commander, unarmed, in civilian clothes, lies bleeding on the pavement. The man who pulled the trigger? A county sheriff. In his own report, the sheriff would later write, "I feared for my life." But surveillance footage, witness statements, and ultimately a jury would tell a very different story. Because 20 months later, that same sheriff would be standing in a courtroom, hearing a judge sentence him to 20 years in prison. So what really happened at that gas station? And how did a routine encounter spiral into a conviction that ended a law enforcement career? The man at the center of this case was Commander James Walker, a 42-year-old Army officer with over 18 years of service. He wasn't in uniform that day. He was off duty, driving through a small county while on leave, heading to visit family. By all accounts, it was supposed to be a normal stop. Fuel, a drink, maybe a quick phone call. Before we go anywhere further, comment where in the world you're watching from, and make sure to subscribe because tomorrow's story is one you don't want to miss. The sheriff, identified as Sheriff Daniel Reeves, had been in office for nearly a decade. Known locally as tough, aggressive, and, according to multiple prior complaints, prone to confrontational policing. That afternoon, Reeves was also off duty, but still armed, still carrying authority, and still acting under the color of law. What neither man knew at the time was that within minutes, their paths would cross in a way that would change both of their lives permanently. Security footage shows Commander Walker pulling into the gas station, parking near the entrance and stepping out calmly. At the same time, Sheriff Reeves is seen across the lot, watching. Witnesses later said Reeves appeared to be focused on Walker almost immediately. Within seconds, Reeves approaches. "Hey, what are you doing here?" the sheriff asks. Walker, clearly confused, responds, "Just getting gas." There's no report of a crime, no call for service, no indication of illegal activity, but the tone shifts quickly. "I need to see some ID," Reeves says. Walker pauses. "Am I being detained?" That simple question, "Am I being detained?" often marks the moment where an encounter either stabilizes or escalates. In this case, it escalated. "Don't play games with me. Show me your hands." Walker raises his hand slightly, still holding his car keys. "I'm not doing anything wrong," he says. And then everything changes. Reeves steps back, draws his firearm, and shouts, "Drop it! Drop it now!" Witnesses say Walker froze, confused, looking down at his hands. "It's just my keys," he says. But less than 2 seconds later, a single shot is fired. Walker collapses. At this point, the legal question becomes, what authority did the sheriff actually have to initiate this encounter? Generally speaking, law enforcement officers are allowed to approach anyone in a public place and ask questions. That's considered a consensual encounter. But they cannot detain someone, meaning restrict their movement, without at least reasonable suspicion that a crime is occurring. Reasonable suspicion is more than a hunch. It requires specific, articulable facts. In this case, based on what was later presented in court, there was no report of suspicious activity, no matching description, and no observable crime. So when Reeves demanded ID and began issuing commands, a court would likely ask, was this still a consensual encounter or had it become a detention without legal basis? And then there's the use of force. Officers are generally allowed to use force when they reasonably believe there is an imminent threat of serious harm. But that belief must be objectively reasonable, not just what the officer felt, but what a reasonable officer in the same situation would have believed. And here's the critical issue. Was a man holding car keys, standing in a gas station parking lot, an immediate threat? That's what the jury would later have to decide. After the shot, chaos breaks out. Witnesses can be heard screaming. "Why did you shoot him?" someone yells. Reeves calls it in. Shots fired, suspect down. But even in that moment, the language is telling. Suspect. There had been no confirmed crime. Body cam footage, released months later, shows Reeves pacing, breathing heavily, repeating, "He wouldn't comply, he wouldn't comply." Meanwhile, Walker's on the ground, conscious but struggling, saying, "I told you, it's just my keys."
Emergency services arrive and Walker is rushed to the hospital. He survives, but with severe injuries that would end his active military career. And this is where the situation moves beyond just a bad decision into something much more serious. Because investigators begin asking a deeper question. Was this a mistake, or was it something else? Now we get into the core legal issue: excessive force and constitutional limits. Under the Fourth Amendment, individuals are protected against unreasonable seizures, including the use of force by police. The standard comes down to reasonableness. Courts typically look at three main factors: the severity of the suspected crime, whether the person posed an immediate threat, and whether the person was actively resisting or attempting to flee. In this case, there was no known crime. Walker was not fleeing, and multiple witnesses confirmed he was not threatening the officer. So even if Reeves believed he saw a weapon, the question becomes, was that belief reasonable, or was it a misinterpretation driven by bias, fear, or poor judgment? And this is where officer discretion matters. Officers are given a wide range of discretion in the field, but that discretion is not unlimited. It must stay within constitutional boundaries. And when it crosses those boundaries, it can move from a civil issue into a criminal one, which is exactly what happened here. In the days following the shooting, public reaction was immediate and intense. The department initially placed Reeves on administrative leave, but as surveillance footage and witness statements emerged, the narrative began to shift. Walker's legal team filed a civil rights lawsuit. At the same time, a criminal investigation was launched by an independent agency. Within 3 months, Reeves was indicted on multiple charges, including aggravated assault and civil rights violations. During the trial, prosecutors focused heavily on the lack of justification. They showed the footage frame by frame. They brought in use of force experts, and they highlighted prior complaints against Reeves, suggesting a pattern of aggressive behavior. The defense argued that Reeves made a split-second decision under perceived threat, but the jury didn't agree. After deliberation, they returned a guilty verdict. And at sentencing, the judge made a statement that stood out. Authority does not grant immunity from accountability. Reeves was sentenced to 20 years in prison. So let's break this down clearly. Did the officer have legal authority to approach Commander Walker? Yes, anyone can approach and ask questions. But did he have the authority to escalate that encounter into a detention? Based on the facts presented, that's highly questionable. And did he have the legal justification to use deadly force? That's where the case falls apart, because deadly force requires an immediate, reasonable belief of serious threat. And here, the evidence suggested that belief was not reasonable. Now, to be fair, officers often have to make fast decisions in uncertain situations. Mistakes can happen, but the law doesn't excuse unreasonable mistakes when they result in serious harm. And this is the key point. Did the officer have legal authority? Maybe. But having authority does not automatically mean the decision was wise, ethical, or necessary. In this case, the jury concluded it was not, and the consequences reflected that. There are a few critical takeaways from this case. First, not every police encounter starts with a crime. Second, how an officer interprets a situation in those first few seconds can determine everything that follows. And third, for civilians, remain calm. Avoid sudden movements. Do not argue on the roadside. If questioned, you can ask if you are free to leave. If detained, comply physically, but document everything afterward. And if something goes wrong, the courtroom, not the street, is where those battles are fought. Because once force is used, there's no one doing it. So what do you think? Was this lawful police work under pressure, or did this officer take a routine situation way too far?